Thank you. My journey in the world of dance began as a young boy at the age of 6 when my parents sent me to study Kathak. And I am a person now in the state of Jharkhand because I grew up in Jamshedpur. At that time, it was in the state of Bihar. We're talking about the 50s, when a young boy was never sent to study dance, and especially coming from a community which I belong to, the Parsis. But I was fortunate and blessed that my parents did send me because they saw a streak of talent, but neither did they or I at that point of time realize that it would be a passion and it would be a career, and dedicated my life to dance. After having finished school, I really wanted to pursue and go into acting school, and I recall my father saying that boys from good families don't take stage on as a career. So I studied economics, and when I was studying economics in Bombay, at that time Bombay, now Mumbai, I saw that there was innovation happening in music, in theater, in visual arts, but nothing in dance. So I happened to see an American dance company come, and I was exposed to a completely different style of movement, and also the fact that I saw an ensemble work, because if you all know that primarily Indian classical dance is a solo work, excepting for Kathakali. Now there are sort of disciplines of Bharatanatyam, Odissi, Manipuri, Kuchipudi, where there is ensemble work. But primarily still, if you see, the best dancers are still solo performers. So I was very intrigued by a completely different form of movement, and I sort of had a bargain with my father that if I graduated, which I did, he would at least consider allowing me to pursue my dream. Now in those days, I'm talking about 1969 now, when I had to go overseas, and the way I left to go overseas was not the normal route of getting my father to buy me an airplane ticket and send me off, but I decided to hitchhike. But the problem was that you couldn't go through Pakistan. So the loophole was to travel on a cargo boat with goats and sheep heading towards the Gulf. And that's how I left. And also, if you traveled as a laborer to the Gulf, you did not require permission to leave the country, because in those days, it's not like today that you have a passport and a visa, you can get on a plane and go. So this was the loophole, and that's how I left with the backpack on the 23rd of May, sailed out, and landed after 10 days in Khurramshah, Iran. And from Iran up to the port of Calais in France, I hitchhiked at a period of 2.5 months, visiting, seeing the countries which one what had seen and studied in school and college. The destination was the US, but the problem was I had not taken my visa from India, because the last sailing of the boat, which was on the 23rd of May, and after that, there was no sailing till the monsoons got over. But on having been assured that I would get a visa, I left, but the visa never happened. So I started thinking, now, what am I to do? Am I supposed to return back to India, or am I supposed to go ahead? And the fact that the 2.5 months that I spent with the help of my thumb standing on the road and going from one destination to the other, I was sort of further encouraged, and I said, I shall continue to go ahead. And from England, I proceeded on to go to Canada. And subsequently, for the next 8 years, I traveled on all the 5 continents, studying, observing dances. Some I took part actively in studying, and some I just observed. Coming back home after 8 years, I by then had sort of evolved as a dancer, had ideas, and I wanted to sort of start a movement of contemporary dance in India. And I came back in the end of '77, and for the next 10 years, I was considered the enfant terrible. The Indian classical gurus would say, "Kya karta hai? Ek pair uthaya, ek haath uthaya, usko kya dance kehte hain?" So there were lots of sort of oppositions which sort of were thrown at me, but that did not deter me from continuing and pursuing, because I had to cultivate an audience. Now, audiences, and even today still, like, when one does a work, like a work I did like this, and they would say, what is the message? What is the meaning you're trying to say? And I say, well, you go to an exhibition and you see a painter's painting. You do not ask him why he used the color red and why he used the color black and why his strokes were in a particular manner. So similarly, when you look at dance, especially the kind of dance I do, is some works are narrative, but some works are abstract. You look at the work in its totality, and you appreciate the beauty of the lines, the sort of the control, the flexibility. There are certain things, and you take back what you would like to take back, though there is an explanation. So slowly, slowly, I started cultivating the audience. The media was very good in sort of informing the public, and there came a point of time where I started feeling frustrated being just a solo performer. I wanted to interact with other dancers, but some of the dancers, even wanting to, would not dare to because of the fact that they would be rusticated by their gurus. The system still had not really opened up in accepting a style, an umbrella of contemporary dance along with Indian classical dance. Now today what you see on television, and people say, hum contemporary karte hain, and all you see is all this movement and jumping and tumbling, and that's not really contemporary. That can come under a category of bebop or break dance. Because what do you take after you see a 3-minute, 4-minute, and the judges say, awesome, wah, I salute you, perfect, I mean, I sometimes ask, I said, okay, when you see this so-called dance, fine, you're entertained, but do you go back with anything? Is there any thought which you take back? No. In the kind of work that I have been creating and sending out, not messages, but tackling themes, like there have been themes like drug addiction, themes like the effects of the nuclear bomb, themes of water pollution, When you see the work being done by my company, which I'll be soon talking about, you take back something. So when the dancers said, much that we'd like to, but we can't, it so happened one day when I was performing in Calcutta, and I had a friend who used to run a deaf theater company. And I just proposed to her, I said, why don't I do a workshop for your deaf actors? the next big question was, how are you going to teach them when they can't hear music, you know? And again, it was a challenge for me as to how I would start teaching. And I developed a counting method of teaching. And that's what is very much today prevalent in all the groups that I have worked with and I continue to work with, whether it's the deaf or whether it's been the street children of Delhi who I've been mentoring now for the last 7 years and who are part of my dance company, or my working up in the Northeast in Manipur, where I used to work with the Thangta, the martial art practitioners, and now for over 10 years, the Pungchalam drummers also perform with me with their drums and minus their drums. So the counting pattern of 8, a rhythm which is not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but it is a very, very slow of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this particular rhythm of counting, and that's how one taught the deaf. And then when everybody has that rhythm and it starts being simultaneously, then they are synchronized, and that's how the work evolved. So my work with the deaf started taking quite a prominent role in my life. And again, the reason I chose to work with them after the first 2 years, because I saw that there was talent, and I wanted to use myself as a catalyst to bring forward the talent of these young performers onto the stage. Again, working with me is not a joke. It's not easy. A lot of people come and say, the other day I was performing in Delhi and a lady came and said, I'd like to dance, you know, and I said, I'm sorry, you can't. So why can't I dance? I said, first of all, I didn't want to be very rude to say, you know, you're very, very fat, you know. But I said the kind of work I do, which is so minimal today, you've got to be, first of all, young. You've got to be able to, and you've got to be flexible. And I don't think flexibility is in you. So, so I sort of had to be very polite and said, well, you've got to start young. And that's how I sort of evaded her sort of being very insistent that why wouldn't I take her on as a student. So when I was working with the deaf, I made it very clear to them that there has to be no room for mistakes, because I do not want the audience, when they are watching you perform, because at one point of the performance, the music switches off, and they continue to dance as there is, and they're in sync, and they're dancing so elegantly and with such bhav. And that's when you realize that these young performers are not able to hear. And also the fact that I wanted them, and which they eventually do, become role models within the community. That today when I look back at my first group, which started off in Calcutta, and they were with me for 14 years, that though the younger people have got married or are into business, but are still very much involved within the community, creating workshops, both in movement and in mime. Time went on, and one of the major factors that the stumbling factor in the country is that vis-a-vis whether it's the government, cultural bodies, or whether it's the corporate world, they're not really open to sort of encouraging dance. You know, even one has a foundation where dance is used as a medium of education. And I say, like, come and send somebody, even spend a year to see from time to time when I take on young groups, which are practically raw, and you train them. And you train them not only in dance, but you train them, you know, when they travel, how they're going to be traveling, where they're going to be staying, you know, how you're going to sort of conduct yourself, how you're going to be addressing a press conference, how you're going to be answering a Q&A after a performance, because generally after a performance there is always a Q&A because people are always interested in asking and finding out how these people from disability, or even like my street children of Delhi who have been with me for 7 years now, originally came from Salam Balak Trust. And one of the trustees sort of said, why don't you come and work with our young people and select a few and work with them. And always the main issue is who's going to be funding it. The Salam Balak Trust or even the deaf institutions that I have been involved with don't have money. So one is dependent on sort of corporates or on certain sort of donors. And I recall once one of my corporate donors who used to support my deaf work said, Astad, we don't do deaf anymore. We're into street children. So this was the line she said, that from now on, we won't be able to look at your deaf projects. If you have a project of the street kid organization, we'll look into it. And that's how the street children of Delhi came into my lives, and when they came, they were all Bollywood dancers. All they did was Bollywood. And at one point of time, after one of the performances in Mumbai, during a Q&A, one of the audiences asked the young members, it says, do you miss Bollywood dancing? It says, not really, because जब हम Bollywood करते थे, तो लोग तालियां मार के चले जाते थे. अब जब हम असद सर के साथ काम करते हैं, शो के बाद लोग आके हमारे साथ मिलते हैं, बात करते हैं, प्रश्न पूछते हैं. So there was a sense of sort of pride inculcated in them, confidence. And also they see that, from the backgrounds they came and from where they've grabbed the opportunity in studying and working with me and moving on. So this has been really my journey. Again, there were lots of hurdles. I recall, years and years ago when I had gone once to the Ministry of Culture and I wanted a particular funding for a project, and the secretary said, Mr. Deboo, आपको recognition बनने के बाद ही मिलेगा, क्योंकि pioneers have to suffer. So when I did first get my Sangeet Natak Award, I wanted to sort of send him a note. He had moved on to another ministry, and I said, अफसोस की बात है जीते जी मुझे अब एक award मिला है संगीत नाटक का पुरस्कार. Again, stepping out of the box, and especially, for male dancers, which is the issue again as I was talking about male dancers. Male dancers really have it much more difficult, and especially the kind of dance discipline I chose way back in the 70s and still continue to pursue my work. Okay, there has been an acceptance as my work goes, but there are so many other young men who'd like to get a platform, but still makes it very, very difficult for them to get a break, to get the opportunities, because again, the presenters, the sponsors, and even to a large extent the audience, they say we'd rather see a woman perform than a man. But this has not sort of deterred me, or even when I see my young proteges who are now stepping out into creating their own works and getting a platform to perform, and it's endearing. One of the reasons why I chose to work again up in Manipur, and the disciplines that I chose to work with, primarily the first one was the martial art practitioner, the Thangta. And then when you see martial art, you see martial art as a sport itself. And when they would initially present their work, it would be just as a sort of a art form. They did a few movements and audiences clapped. But for them, again, to be incorporated into my creativity, into my choreography, took a challenge for both from their side and from my side also, because of the fact that how was I going to get these young practitioners to learn my movement, because they are very used to being, very, very sort of flick and agile and quick, but to be very, very slow and very minimal. The kind of music that I use in my work, again, is totally alien, and for them, again, to get used to and figure out the cues. So these are all working processes which take place, and eventually when the work is seen and appreciated, and again, it's sort of out of the box, people have opened up and say, yes, there is a possibility of coming of disciplines, coming of different styles together, but done in a very systematic and a methodical manner. Some people say, okay, let's bring on another dancer or musician and we can work things out. It doesn't, because one has to sort of see that there's a lot of respect for each other's work. There's supposed to be communication. There's got to be give and take. And there's got to be no big ego. I mean, I am the creator, but when I'm working, even with the deaf, or with the street children, there are times that sometimes they may have suggested something to me and say, sir, aise kar sakte hain? And I'm open to it. Because again, eventually, you look at the work in its totality. And as I tell all of them, that this work is not mine, it's ours. Thank you very much.